The dust clouds rose high above the mesa as Jake Morrison rode his black stallion through the narrow canyon pass. The sun was beating down mercilessly on the Arizona territory, and sweat dripped from his weathered face beneath the wide brim of his hat. Jake had been a range rider for 15 years, keeping peace in these wild lands where law was scarce and justice often came from the barrel of a gun. As he crested the ridge overlooking Pine Creek Valley, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. In the distance, near the old trading post, 7 tall wooden poles had been erected in a rough circle. Even from this far away, Jake could see the ropes hanging from crossbeams, and worse still, he could make out 7 figures bound at the base of each pole. Jake spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding as he recognized what he was witnessing. A hanging was about to take place, and from the size of the figures, it appeared to be women. His keen eyes spotted at least 30 men gathered around the makeshift gallows, some on horseback, others standing with rifles ready. As he drew closer, staying hidden behind the rocky outcrops, Jake could hear angry voices carried on the wind. The men were shouting about stolen cattle, murdered settlers, and Apache raids. But something felt wrong about the whole scene. Jake had dealt with Apache tribes for years, and he knew their ways. Apache women, especially 7 sisters from the same family, would never be involved in cattle rustling or unprovoked attacks on settlers. Through his field glasses, Jake studied the bound women more carefully. They were indeed Apache, their traditional dress and long black hair unmistakable even in their current dire situation. The eldest couldn't be more than 25, while the youngest looked barely 16. Their faces showed no fear, only the stoic dignity that Apache people maintained even in the face of death. The leader of the mob was a tall man with a silver beard, wearing a black suit that looked out of place in the rough frontier setting. Jake recognized him as Samuel Hartwell, a wealthy cattle baron who owned the largest ranch in 3 counties. Hartwell was known for his ruthless business practices and his hatred of all Native Americans. But this seemed extreme even for him. Jake moved closer, positioning himself behind a large boulder where he could hear the proceedings. Hartwell was reading from a piece of paper, his voice booming across the valley. "These 7 Apache women stand accused of stealing over 200 head of cattle from honest Christian ranchers," Hartwell declared. "They are also charged with providing aid and comfort to the Apache war parties that have terrorized our settlements for months. The evidence against them is clear and overwhelming." One of the Apache women, the eldest sister, lifted her head and spoke in clear English. "We are innocent of these crimes. We have lived in peace with the white settlers. We have harmed no one." Hartwell laughed coldly. "The word of a savage means nothing here. We have witnesses who saw you with the stolen cattle. We have proof that you guided the war parties to our ranches." Jake frowned. Something about Hartwell's confidence troubled him. In his experience, when someone was this eager to carry out a hanging without a proper trial, they usually had something to hide. He decided to get even closer to hear more. Moving carefully from rock to rock, Jake managed to position himself near enough to overhear a quiet conversation between Hartwell and his foreman, a scarred man named Dutch Mackenzie. "You sure those Army reports won't surface?" Mackenzie whispered nervously. "I told you. I've taken care of everything," Hartwell replied in a low voice. "Once these women are dead, there'll be no one left who knows the truth about what really happened to those cattle. The Army will blame the Apache, just like we planned." Jake's jaw tightened. So this wasn't about justice at all. Hartwell was using these innocent women as scapegoats for something else entirely. But what were these Army reports Mackenzie mentioned, and what really happened to the missing cattle? Before Jake could hear more, one of Hartwell's men spotted movement near the rocks. "Boss! Someone's out there spying on us!" Rifles swung in Jake's direction as he ducked lower behind the boulder. His mind raced as he calculated his options. 30 armed men against 1 range rider weren't good odds, but he couldn't just ride away and let 7 innocent women die. "Whoever you are, show yourself," Hartwell shouted. "This is legal business, sanctioned by the territorial authority." Jake knew that was a lie. No territorial judge would authorize a mass hanging without a trial, especially not of Apache women. He also knew that if he revealed himself now, he'd likely end up hanging alongside the Seven Sisters. As the men spread out to search for him, Jake made a difficult decision. He would have to retreat for now, but not to abandon the women. Instead, he needed to find proof of what Hartwell was really up to. Those Army reports Mackenzie mentioned might be the key to saving the Apache sisters and exposing whatever ruthless plot was unfolding on the frontier. Jake carefully backed away from his hiding spot, moving silently through the rocks until he reached his horse. The sun was getting lower in the sky, and he estimated he had maybe 2 hours before Hartwell carried out the executions. As he mounted his stallion, Jake took one last look at the 7 Apache women standing with quiet dignity beside their intended gallows. The eldest sister seemed to sense his presence and turned her head slightly in his direction. Even from this distance, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes and something else, a look that said she knew someone was out there, someone who might help. Jake touched the brim of his hat in a subtle salute that only she could see, then turned his horse toward the Army outpost 20 miles away. If those reports existed, that's where they'd be. And if he was right about Hartwell's plot, time was running out fast. The black stallion stretched into a full gallop as Jake raced against the setting sun, determined to uncover the truth before 7 innocent lives were lost to one man's greed and hatred. Behind him, the dust cloud from his horse's hooves slowly settled, leaving no trace of the Lone Ranger who had witnessed the injustice and vowed to stop it. Fort Apache stood like a lonely sentinel against the desert landscape, its wooden walls weathered by countless sandstorms and scorching summers. Jake Morrison's horse was lathered with sweat as he thundered through the main gate, startling the sentries who knew him well from his many visits as a range rider. "Captain Williams!" Jake shouted as he leaped from his saddle. "I need to see Captain Williams right now." The young sergeant at the gate pointed toward the command building. "He's in his office, Jake, but he's got company. Some territorial officials arrived this morning." Jake didn't slow down. He burst through the office door to find Captain Williams seated behind his desk, facing 3 men in expensive suits. Williams was a fair-minded officer who had always dealt honestly with both settlers and Apache tribes, earning respect from both sides. "Jake Morrison," the captain said with surprise. "What brings you here in such a hurry?" "Captain, I need to see any reports you have about missing cattle in Pine Creek Valley," Jake said breathlessly. 7 Apache women are about to be hanged for rustling, but I think someone's using them to cover up a bigger crime. One of the suited men, a thin fellow with wire-rimmed glasses, stood up quickly. "This is highly irregular. These are confidential military matters." Captain Williams studied Jake's face carefully. The range rider's reputation for honesty and justice was well known throughout the territory. "What exactly did you see, Jake?" Jake quickly explained the scene at Pine Creek Valley, including the conversation he'd overheard between Hartwell and his foreman about Army reports. As he spoke, he noticed the 3 visitors exchanging worried glances. "I'm afraid I can't help you," Captain Williams said slowly, but his eyes were telling a different story. "Those reports you're asking about are classified." The man with glasses stepped forward. "Perhaps it would be best if Mr. Morrison left now. This matter doesn't concern him." Jake was about to argue when Captain Williams gave him a meaningful look and tapped his finger twice on the desk, an old signal they'd used before when the captain couldn't speak freely. Williams then stood and walked to the window. "It's getting late," the captain said loudly. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps you should check the supply shed before it gets dark. Sometimes important documents get mixed in with the supply manifests by mistake." Jake understood immediately. "Yes, sir. I'll check there right away." As Jake left the office, He heard one of the visitors saying, "We're glad you understand the delicate nature of this situation, Captain. Mr. Hartwell's cooperation has been invaluable to the territorial government." Outside, Jake hurried to the supply shed behind the main buildings. The door was unlocked, and inside he found what Captain Williams had wanted him to see. Hidden beneath a stack of supply manifests was a folder marked Confidential Cattle Investigation. Jake opened the folder and began reading by lamplight. What he discovered made his blood boil. According to the Army's investigation, Samuel Hartwell had been systematically stealing cattle from smaller ranches and blaming the thefts on Apache raids. The reports showed that Hartwell's men would rustle cattle during the night, then plant evidence near Apache camps to make it look like the tribes were responsible. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The 7 Apache sisters had actually been helping the Army investigate the cattle thefts. They had provided crucial information about Hartwell's operations, including dates, times, and locations where the stolen cattle were being hidden. The eldest sister, whose name was listed as Morning Star, had been working as an informant for Captain Williams. Jake's hands trembled as he read further. The reports showed that Hartwell had discovered the sisters were helping the Army. The cattle baron had apparently bribed territorial officials to delay any action while he eliminated the witnesses. The mass hanging was designed to look like frontier justice, but it was actually cold-blooded murder to protect Hartwell's criminal enterprise. A noise outside made Jake quickly close the folder and stuff it inside his shirt. He blew out the lamp and peered through a crack in the door. The 3 visitors from the captain's office were walking toward the shed, talking in low voices. "We need to make sure all evidence disappears," one of them was saying. "Hartwell is paying us good money to keep this quiet." "What about Captain Williams? Can we trust him to stay silent?" "He'll do what's best for his career. Besides, by tomorrow night, all the witnesses will be dead, and this whole affair will be forgotten." Jake's heart raced as he realized he was trapped. The men were almost at the shed door, and there was no other way out. He looked around desperately and spotted a ladder leading up to a small loft. Quietly, he climbed up and pressed himself against the rafters just as the door opened below. The men entered with a lantern, searching through the supplies. "Where did Williams say he put those Army reports?" one of them asked. "He said they were here somewhere. Help me look through these manifests." Jake held his breath as the men searched below him. Papers rustled and boxes were moved as they looked for the very documents he had hidden in his shirt. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they gave up. "Maybe Williams already destroyed them," one man suggested. "Better safe than sorry. We'll search his office again tomorrow after the Apache women are dead and this whole mess is cleaned up." The men left the shed, and Jake waited several more minutes before climbing down. He had what he needed to expose Hartwell's plot, but now he had to get back to Pine Creek Valley before it was too late. Jake slipped out of the shed and made his way to the stables where his horse was being watered and fed. The moon was rising, casting long shadows across the fort. He estimated he had perhaps 4 or 5 hours before dawn, when Hartwell would likely carry out the executions. As he saddled his horse, Jake heard footsteps behind him. He spun around to find Captain Williams approaching in the darkness. "Did you find what you were looking for?" the captain asked quietly. "Yes, sir, and a lot more besides. Those territorial officials in your office, they're working for Hartwell, aren't they?" Captain Williams nodded grimly. "I suspected as much, but I couldn't prove it. Hartwell has been bribing officials throughout the territory. My hands have been tied because my superiors ordered me to stay out of civilian matters. Well, those 7 Apache women aren't going to stay out of their graves unless someone stops this," Jake said as he mounted his horse. "Be careful, Jake. Hartwell has over 30 men, and they'll shoot first and ask questions later. Even with those reports, it might not be enough to stop him." Jake touched the papers hidden in his shirt. "Maybe not, but I have to try. Those women trusted the Army to protect them, and they're about to die for helping us." Captain Williams grabbed the horse's bridle. "Wait, take this." He handed Jake an official Army dispatch pouch with the fort's seal. "If you can delay the hanging long enough, I might be able to get some men together to help, but it will take time." Jake secured the dispatch pouch to his saddle and spurred his horse toward the gate. Behind him, Captain Williams called out, "Good luck, Jake. Those women are counting on you." As Jake rode into the night, racing back toward Pine Creek Valley, he knew he was heading into the most dangerous situation of his life. But 7 innocent lives hung in the balance, and someone had to stand up to men like Samuel Heartfelt, who thought their money and power put them above the law. Dawn was breaking over Pine Creek Valley as Jake Morrison approached the execution site. His horse was exhausted from the hard ride through the night, but there was no time to rest. In the pale morning light, he could see that the 7 Apache sisters were still alive, though they now stood on wooden crates beneath the hanging ropes. Samuel Heartfelt stood before the condemned women like a preacher delivering a sermon, his black suit immaculate despite the desert setting. His 30 armed men formed a loose circle around the gallows, rifles ready for any interference. "People of this territory," Heartfelt declared to the small crowd of settlers who had gathered to witness the execution, "today, we deliver justice to these Apache criminals who have terrorized our ranches and murdered our people. Let this be a warning to all savages who would dare to steal from honest Christians." Jake studied the scene carefully from his hiding place behind the same boulder where he'd watched the day before. Heartfelt's men were positioned well, but Jake noticed something that might work in his favor. The cattle baron was so confident in his control of the situation that his guards were more focused on watching for Apache rescue parties than on protecting their rear flanks. The eldest sister, Morning Star, stood tall on her wooden crate despite the rope around her neck. Even facing death, she maintained the dignity and composure that had made her such an effective informant for the army. Jake could see her scanning the rocks and ridges, probably hoping for rescue that she must have known wasn't coming. "Any last words before we carry out this sentence?" Heartfelt asked mockingly. Morning Star lifted her chin and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the valley. "We are innocent of the crimes you accuse us of. The Great Spirit knows the truth, and one day justice will find you, Samuel Heartfelt." Heartfelt laughed coldly. "The only spirit that matters here is the spirit of American justice. Men, prepare to—" "Hold it right there!" Jake's voice boomed across the valley as he stepped out from behind the boulder, his hands clearly visible but resting near his guns. Every rifle in the circle swung toward him, but Heartfelt raised a hand to stop his men from shooting immediately. "Well, well," Heartfelt said with amusement. "Jake Morrison, the famous range rider. Come to save some Apache women, have you? That's very noble of you, but also very stupid." "I've come to stop a murder," Jake replied, walking slowly toward the gallows. "These women are innocent, and you know it." "Innocent?" Heartfelt scoffed. "They were caught with stolen cattle. The evidence is overwhelming." Jake reached into his shirt and pulled out the Army reports. "You mean the evidence you planted? The evidence described in these official Army documents that show how you've been stealing cattle and blaming the Apache tribes?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Heartfelt's face. "Those are forgeries. Anyone can write up false documents. These are signed by Captain Williams at Fort Apache," Jake said loudly enough for all the gathered settlers to hear. "They detail your entire operation, how your men steal cattle at night, plant evidence near Apache camps, then blame the tribes for your crimes. These 7 women were actually helping the Army investigate your rustling operation." Murmurs began spreading through the crowd of settlers. Some of them had lost cattle to the supposed Apache raids, and they were starting to look at Heartfelt with suspicion rather than admiration. "Don't listen to him," Heartfelt shouted. "He's obviously been corrupted by Apache gold. Morrison has gone native and can't be trusted." Dutch Mackenzie, Heartfelt's scarred foreman, stepped forward nervously. "Boss, maybe we should listen to what he has to say. If the Army—" "Shut up, Dutch!" Hartwell snapped. "We're finishing this now. Men, shoot Morrison, and then carry out the executions." But Jake had been counting on Hartwell's arrogance. As the cattle baron gave the order to shoot, Jake dove behind one of the wooden gallows posts, using it as cover while he drew his guns. The first shots rang out, splintering the wood near Jake's head. But in their eagerness to kill him, Hartwell's men had forgotten about the crowd of settlers, who now found themselves in the line of fire. People scattered, screaming and running for cover. "You're shooting at innocent folks," one of the settlers yelled at Hartwell's men. "What kind of justice is this?" Jake used the confusion to his advantage. He fired 2 quick shots, not to kill, but to wound. One of Hartwell's gunmen dropped his rifle with a cry of pain as Jake's bullet clipped his shoulder. Another dove for cover as a second shot barely missed his head. "The Army reports show everything," Jake shouted to the crowd as he reloaded behind cover. "Hartwell has been stealing your cattle and blaming the Apache. These women are innocent." Morningstar's voice rang out clearly above the gunfire. "He speaks the truth. We helped the Soldier Chief Williams track the real cattle thieves. Samuel Hartwell is the criminal, not us." More of Hartwell's men began to hesitate. They had signed up to rustle cattle and frame Apache for crimes, but firing on innocent settlers was something else entirely. Several of them lowered their weapons, uncertain what to do. Hartwell, seeing his control slipping away, pulled out his own gun and pointed it directly at Morningstar. "Enough! I don't care what those Army reports say. These women hang today." "I don't think so." The new voice came from the ridge overlooking the valley. Captain Williams appeared with 20 cavalry soldiers, their rifles trained on Hartwell's men. The Army had arrived just in time. "Samuel Hartwell," Captain Williams called out, "you are under arrest for cattle rustling, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Order your men to throw down their weapons." Hartwell's face turned red with rage. "You have no authority here. This is civilian territory." "Actually, we do," Captain Williams replied. "These women are under Army protection as official informants. Any attack on them is an attack on the United States Army." The fight went out of Hartwell's men all at once. Faced with professional soldiers and growing anger from the local settlers, they began dropping their rifles and raising their hands. Even Dutch Mackenzie threw down his gun with obvious relief. But Hartwell himself wasn't finished. Seeing his empire collapsing around him, he made one last desperate move. With a snarl of fury, he cocked his gun and aimed it at Morningstar's heart. "If I can't have justice my way, then I'll take it myself." Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped out from behind the gallows post and fired once. His bullet struck Hartwell's gun, sending it spinning out of the cattle baron's hand. Hartwell staggered backward, clutching his wounded wrist. "It's over, Hartwell," Jake said quietly, as he approached with his gun still drawn. "Your rustling days are finished." Captain Williams and his soldiers quickly secured the area while Jake cut the ropes binding the 7 Apache sisters. Morningstar rubbed her wrists where the ropes had chafed, then looked directly into Jake's eyes. "You came back," she said simply. "I saw you yesterday in the rocks. I hoped you would return." "I gave my word," Jake replied, "even if it was only to myself." As the Army rounded up Hartwell and his remaining men, the gathered settlers began to understand the full scope of what had happened. They had been manipulated into supporting the execution of innocent women to cover up the very crimes that had cost them their livestock. "What happens now?" one of the settlers asked Captain Williams. "Now we recover the stolen cattle from Hartwell's hidden corrals," the captain replied. "And we make sure this kind of injustice never happens again in our territory." Morningstar approached Jake as he prepared to mount his horse. "The Apache people will not forget what you did here today. You risked your life for strangers." "They weren't strangers," Jake said, touching the brim of his hat. "They were people who needed help. That's what the law is supposed to be about, protecting the innocent, no matter who they are." As Jake rode away from Pine Creek Valley, The 7 Apache sisters stood free beside their broken gallows. And Samuel Hartwell sat in army chains, his ruthless plot exposed and his criminal empire destroyed. Justice had won the day, but it had taken the courage of one range rider who refused to let innocent people die for another man's greed. The sun climbed higher over the Arizona territory, shining down on a land where the law had finally proven stronger than money and hatred. And somewhere in the distance, a black stallion carried its rider toward the next valley where justice might be needed.